sexual promiscuity, and the entry into her life of a man who, she told me, regularly beat her. Brenda was, to say the least, self-destructive. She was also an extraordinarily beautiful woman, charming, smart, and charismatic. Her stormy marriage to Bill Bixby had ended in divorce, and she remained tortured over the loss of her son Christopher, who had died at age 7 in a bizarre medical accident. Brenda never truly recovered from that shock, and at one point she told me I was her last hope. A pretty heavy thing to say to a 17-year-old, although at the time I couldn't fathom exactly what she meant. Our lunch date was meant to help us forge a friendship after the ending of our relationship. At least that's what I thought. For Brenda, it was no lunch date. Arriving at her house, I let myself in. I found the door to the downstairs bathroom, the one I most often used, closed and the house in silence. I called out and got no response, although I was sure she was in that bathroom. I tried the door, but it was locked. I begged her to come out. In my teenage mind, I had sensed all along the possibility that Brenda would try suicide, but it was never discussed. In that moment, as I stood in the foyer, I knew we were in trouble. As I backed away from the door, I told her nothing was so awful that it couldn't be handled. I said I would be calling the police. I was more scared than at any other time in my life. I stepped out of the house and closed the front door, intending to go to a neighbor for help. As I went up the steps to the gate, I heard the gunshot. Brenda had heard me, listened to my pleas, waited for me to leave, and then shot herself. None of the neighbors were home, so, in terror, I went back into the house and called the police from there. I sat alone in the dining room, knowing Brenda was likely dead just behind the locked bathroom door. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes before the phone rang. It was syndicated newspaper entertainment columnist Marilyn Beck. Brenda had given Marilyn an interview the week before, and it was scheduled to run in a few days. Now Marilyn was laughing. "Tammy, I just got the oddest phone call from NBC asking me not to run my interview with Brenda. They said she had just killed herself. Can you believe that?" You may be wondering, as I was, how Marilyn Beck had heard of Brenda's death so quickly. This would become one of my enduring lessons about people, Hollywood, and the media. I found out later that when the call for a squad car and for an ambulance went out over the police radio, a local Santa Monica reporter who was routinely monitoring the dispatches recognized Brenda's address. The reporter thought to call NBC to see if they knew anything. It was no secret that Brenda had not really dealt with Christopher's death, and so, when the NBC press person received the call, she presumed Brenda had killed herself. Go figure. In classic Hollywood fashion, the flack didn't bother to call the house to confirm, but thought immediately of the interview she had to stop. She called Marilyn within 5 minutes of my calling the police, and 7 minutes of Brenda's death. Welcome to Hollywood. The police arrived soon after that, guns drawn. They asked me where Brenda was and proceeded to kick down the bathroom door. There was nothing much left to do. I answered the policeman's questions, the coroner came and took the body, and the house was sealed. It was over. Brenda was dead at the age of 36. Aftermath. Brenda's suicide made national news, but I kept the truth about our relationship secret. Even now, after all these years, I only feel somewhat comfortable telling about it because Brenda, Christopher, and Bill are all gone, and I feel that I am exposing only myself. There were acts of kindness during this indescribable time that stand out for me. In the weeks following Brenda's death, many of her friends literally came to my rescue, and, to my surprise, so did Bill Bixby. I stopped eating after Brenda's death, and after a week of that, I ended up in the emergency room of a Los Angeles hospital. I was eventually admitted, although I was without insurance and certainly didn't have access to funds sufficient to cover a hospital stay. Weeks later, I found out that it was Bill who had picked up the cost of my care. It was something he did not have to do, and yet he did it without hesitation. What Bill did was decent and kind. Unfortunately, I was so used to indecent things that the examples of kindness I received from Bill and some of Brenda's friends did not eclipse the impact Brenda had had on me. In the years that followed, my entire focus was on me, what I wanted, what I was going to get, how much money I was going to make. There were no moral standards in my life. It was a world of self-indulgent narcissism. What was Tammy going to do today? What was Tammy going to buy today? What could people do for Tammy today? I considered myself bisexual through my mid-20s, and boy, I sure acted on it. I was promiscuous and indiscriminate. I also experimented with a variety of drugs during my early 20s. If it felt good, I did it. It was this self-absorption that facilitated a view of myself as a victim. With my narcissism running wild, everything bad that happened to me happened because I was a woman or because I was gay. After all, if I wasn't responsible for the things that happened in my life, especially the bad things, then someone else had to be. This mindset, and the emotional and psychological damage I had suffered, made me a perfect foot soldier for the organized left because of their romanticization of victimhood and promises of empowerment. However, unlike many of my colleagues in feminist and gay activism, I sought psychological help. One way or another, I was seeing a psychologist throughout my time as president of the Los Angeles branch of NOW, the National Organization for Women, and I began to make considerable progress in dealing with the aftermath of my childhood, which was no picnic, and young adulthood. It was that personal progress, I believe, that kept me from getting completely sucked into the relativism and hypocrisy I saw in the actions and agenda of other leaders in both the feminist and the gay movements. Moral clarity. For me, the true lesson to be drawn from this experience became clearer as I approached the age Brenda was when she killed herself. At first, I was shocked that I had made it to my 36th birthday. I then told myself that the real test would be making it to my 37th, which is now also come and gone. But then the most fascinating thing happened to me. After years of living with what-ifs, I was finally able to look back on my experience as an adult and not as a confused and guilt-ridden teenager. Reaching 36, I asked myself, what could Brenda have seen in a 17-year-old? I was probably precocious, but obviously not the most stable of teens. Only at 36 could I look back and see, for the first time, how morally bankrupt that entire situation had been. Brenda's pulling essentially a child, and I do view teenagers as children, into her world of lies, deception, booze, and sex was indeed morally corrupt. The ultimate indecency, though, was her arranging for a 19-year-old to find what she must have known would be the obscene result of a gunshot wound to the head. So there you have it. My relationship with Brenda, culminating in her death, is the crucial event in my life. It framed my young adulthood consciously and subconsciously, creating for me a worldview replete with moral relativism, paranoia, and cynicism. More than that, it kept me from looking at politics, the people I was dealing with, or other parts of my own life with any kind of a values-based perspective. When your life does not incorporate those things, you're less inclined to seek them out or expect them of others. It's that simple. I had learned from my experience with Brenda how to not apply a value or make a judgment. Right and wrong were relative. That is how I reconciled myself to my past, while my left-wing activism, and indeed our entire culture in the 1980s, continued to reinforce that perspective. My life experience and damaged outlook made me a perfect candidate for the left elite in more ways than you can imagine, but primarily because of my skewed vision of right and wrong and my willingness to enter a world swirling around a moral vacuum. It was no accident that my expanded personal awareness today is tied to my ability to see my own past for all that it is. Some may argue that I'm projecting my own issues onto the political landscape. Well, that's part of human nature. All our political views are wrapped up with our own histories.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.